Hello, and thank you for joining me in this virtual space. My name is Sheila Parkins, and I am the program analyst for the Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee Program. Today, I will cover information on how to submit an application for program assistance and some of the basic information about the Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee Program. If you're watching this video, you've likely found your way to our program dashboard, which I've brought up on our screen. This program is designed to assist landlords with a reimbursement for damages and unpaid rent caused by a tenant who either had a housing choice voucher, commonly known as Section 8, or had received rental assistance under a rehousing initiative through the Governor's Executive Order 2302, 2402, and 2501. For more information on the Governor's executive orders, please go to the website for the Office of the Oregon Governor. The inclusion of rehousing initiatives from the executive order is for a limited time beginning January 10th, 2023 and ended January 10th, 2026. The expansion didn't limit the time a landlord can request assistance because even if the termination of the rental agreement occurred after January 10th, 2026, landlords will still be able to submit their application for these funds. To qualify under a rehousing initiative, the provider who originally assisted the tenant with funds to move into your unit must have submitted to our office a rehousing certification within 30 days of the start of the tenancy, verifying that the funding source of that assistance was an eligible funding source. If we do not have a rehousing certification on file, then the tenancy will not qualify for the program. If you believe the tenancy qualifies but are unsure whether such a rehousing certification was submitted, you can contact our office and we will confirm whether or not the tenancy qualifies. But please remember, if your tenant had a housing choice voucher, none of the instructions related to a rehousing certification apply to your tenancy, and you can disregard that guidance associated with a rehousing certification. Eligible tenancies must begin after January 10th, 2023 if the tenant was under a rehousing initiative, or after July 1st, 2014 if the tenant was under a housing choice voucher. You must complete an application for assistance with all required documentation in order to receive funding under this program. Your application is incomplete and cannot be processed without the documentation required in the application. We'll cover that more later in the video. It's important to know that this program has limited funds, and it depends on a state budget appropriation. Historically, we've not run out of funds. However, should that occur, your application will be held in the order received, and we will process it in that order should additional funds become available. However, there is no guarantee that additional funds beyond what is appropriated for the program will be made available. Once funds are depleted, the ability to apply will end. Landlords with already submitted but unprocessed applications will be notified in writing, and this dashboard will be updated to reflect the information that funds are unavailable. If you are concerned about whether funds are available before you submit an application, you can always contact us by using the contact information shown on the center of your screen. I'll even make it bigger. Additionally, if you mail information to us, you should always use Attention Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee on the envelope to ensure that it reaches the correct team within our agency. On the right side of this dashboard, you will find the number of pending applications. The more that are pending, the longer you can expect wait times to be for the processing of your application. On the left side of the dashboard are your resources. It's highly recommended that you review the Frequently Asked Questions document. This will give you quick access to some of the most common questions about the program and the application process. There are also other helpful links for you, such as written materials for walking through this application, the how to apply written step-by-step instructions, which basically will reiterate the information that I'm sharing with you now, but in written form for those who prefer a different delivery of information. And there are also links to the Oregon Revised Statute right there for residential tenant and landlord law, links to special rules that apply to the city of Portland, and other helpful information. Our application for assistance will not allow you to enter a request for multiple properties or tenancies at the same time, so you will need to request funds for each tenancy separately. You could bookmark this page in your internet browser, right there, if that would be helpful in you finding your way back to this dashboard. Additionally, you will want to right-click any links within the application and open them in a new tab to avoid losing your place in the application. You may need to copy and paste a link into a new tab if the hyperlink doesn't show up in the application. If you leave the application for any reason, you will not be able to come back to it, and everything you've entered up to that point will be lost. There is not a way to return to the application or edit the application once you've left it and have submitted it. And when you click the links for the assistance for how to apply or for the frequently asked questions, do be patient on the links. There are times when it will take a few extra seconds to wait before it will come up. Your application must include documentation that completely supports your request. Our agency will not chase documentation from you, and you must submit all your documentation at the time of the application. If you have difficulties navigating the attachment function in the application for any reason, you can email or mail documents to us at the contact information, again shown at the middle of the screen. It is important to recognize that OHCS has 45 days to review your complete application. This time clock does not begin until we have the complete application, which is inclusive of all the required documents. So if you are very close to the timeline to submit your application, submitting it without the documentation will not help you meet that timeline. For example, if the tenant moved out on April 30th of the previous year and you submit an incomplete application on April 27th of this year, but do not submit your documentation until May 3rd, that's not going to help you meet the deadline, as the application is incomplete when it was submitted on April 27th, and it's not until May 3rd that the application was deemed as being submitted in completion, and May 3rd is outside the year deadline. A complete application must be submitted within 1 year from the date the tenant moved out, and that includes the supporting documentation. You must submit everything you wish OHCS to consider at the time of the application. All decisions are final, and new information submitted after an award determination is made will not be considered. This means that if funds are awarded, landlords will not receive additional funds after an award determination is made with the submission of more materials. We will not increase an award by sending you more funds based on those materials. If approved, you will receive only one award, even if it's less than you requested. There is no guarantee that you will receive all the funds that you request. Awards are based on OHCS's sole discretion of the review of the required documents, which may result in the disallowance of costs that are not substantiated, documented, depreciated, are duplicated, or considered unreasonable or ineligible. For example, landlords are able to choose their vendors. However, if you choose a vendor that charges $150 an hour to remove trash or replace a door, that would be considered unreasonable, and only a reasonable charge will be allowed in this program. Again, all award determinations are final at OHCS's discretion. If OHCS is unable to reach the minimum amount of $500 based on your documentation, you will not be able to offer additional information after the award determination is made. All decisions are final, and you must submit everything you wish OHCS to consider at the time of the application. If a request is denied as ineligible, OHCS will not reconsider the application with the addition of more information, as meeting eligibility requirements is not optional. However, if we are unable to make an award determination at all because no documentation was submitted, then the application will be denied, and the landlord may resubmit the application with all the required documents and start the process over again within a year of the tenant's move-out date. A new application will be processed in the order it was received. Please remember that this only applies if we cannot make an award determination. If we are able to make an award determination based on what was submitted, even if it is less than desired, you will not have another opportunity to submit more materials just because you didn't get all the funds you requested. Remember, all decisions are final, so submit everything you want OHCS to consider at the time of application. The most frequent complaint we receive is based on the fact that applicants want to submit more information after funds have been awarded. Remember, all decisions are final, and even if you didn't get all you requested, the decision was based on the documentation at the time of application. So remember, submit everything you want us to consider at the time of the application. Application awards will be between $500 as the minimum to the maximum of $20,000. Now, before we jump into the application, let's talk about the types of documentation that you will need to include with your application. You should have all these documents when you get ready to complete your application so that you can do so in a single sitting. I'm going to flip over to this right here, brought up fairly large enough so that you can see it. So first up is proof of your housing choice voucher participation. If tenancy was under a housing choice voucher, you must submit a document from the housing authority that shows your name as the landlord, the tenant's name, and the property address. Your housing assistance payment contract is typically around 12 pages long, and you sign it at the beginning of the tenancy. Part A of the contract provides the information that we're looking for, and it's just 2 pages long, and a sample of it is shown on your screen. If you're unable to locate this contract, you may also submit a letter that you have received from the housing authority regarding the tenancy with your name, the tenant's name, and the property address. We will also be confirming the information directly with the housing authority. If the tenancy was under a rehousing initiative, OHCS will review the rehousing certification submitted by the provider to OHCS at the beginning of the tenancy. Again, if there's no rehousing certification on file, the tenancy will not qualify for this program. OHCS does not administer assistance programs at the local level, so we can only confirm or deny that a rehousing certification was submitted. If you would like to contact us at our email address in advance of applying for funds under the rehousing initiative. Remember, you can do so by emailing us at the contact information located in the center of the dashboard that you just saw. Additionally, tenancies issued under a rehousing certification for roommate situations may be limited, and awards may not apply to communally used facilities or other areas of the home. Again, this only is applicable to rehousing initiatives, not housing choice vouchers. Reimbursement of damages in a rehousing initiative for roommates will likely be limited to the rented room for which the tenant has responsibility. However, OHCS will consider all documentation received for a roommate tenancy that meets eligibility requirements. Next is an executed lease or rental agreement. You must submit a copy of your completely executed lease or rental agreement, including all exhibits, attachments, or appendices. This must be the whole document and must be signed and dated by yourself as the landlord and the tenant. Please note that we do not need a copy of the lead-based paint disclosure and brochure, even if you did provide it to the tenant. So you can skip including that document to lessen the amount of documents you have to submit. The lease agreement is important in documenting the validity of expenses charged to the tenant. This is particularly important in the Portland area due to Portland City Code that requires that fixtures, appliances, equipment, or personal property be itemized by description and condition and incorporated into the rental agreement. For more information on the City of Portland rules, you can click the link that was available on the dashboard. Next is both a move-in and move-out condition report. This may be a single document showing both move-in and move-out conditions in a side-by-side view, as what you see on the screen, or it could be 2 separate documents. This typically will include narratives for the conditions of the property that may not be visible in photos. You must submit a copy of both the move-in and move-out condition reports or the checklists. The move-in must be signed by yourself and the tenant and be dated within a reasonable period from the start date of the agreement. It is possible that you may not have a moving condition report if the tenancy was very lengthy, if the property changed hands, or if the tenant just never did return it to you. OHCS could reduce any awards by amounts that are not fully substantiated by other documents that you submit. Having the move-in report is what helps us substantiate the extent of your loss with a comparison of move-in versus move-out. The move-out condition report does not need to be signed by the tenant. However, it still must be included. This is extremely helpful in documenting the condition of the unit at the time that the tenant moved out and helps support your requests for funds. As the move-out condition report typically has a narrative section, it also allows you to write out things that are not seen in a photograph, such as odors. Next is a tenant rent ledger. Attach a copy of the last 24 months of your tenant's payment history. This can be a general ledger from your accounting system or some other tracking mechanism. If the tenancy was less than 24 months, you only need to provide the ledger for the length of the tenancy. Next is the security deposit accounting. Landlords are required in Oregon Revised Statute 90.300 to provide tenants a notice within 31 days from the date that they moved out if you intend to keep any of the tenant's security deposit. A tenant has legal recourse against you if you do not provide this notice. The notice must include a written account of charges that supports your claims to the security deposit and identifies the charges you feel are the tenant's responsibility to cover. This document summarizes the expenses that were deducted from the security deposit and shows the tenant how much is left owing. Remember, this is a legal requirement, so you should have this document. The only reason that you may not have this document would be because the tenant did not pay a security deposit. However, if you did still send them a letter identifying how much they owed you and why, you can attach that to your application instead. Next are receipts, bills, and invoices. You will want to include copies of your receipts, bills, invoices, statements, work orders, whatever documents you have that support the amount of funds that you are requesting. If the repair or cleanup is something that you have completed internally, you still need to provide documentation of how much time you expended on each activity you performed and the amount that you're charging per hour. We cannot accept bids, proposals, or estimates as documentations of an expense. You must show proof that these expenses were incurred and paid by you. This is a reimbursement program only. OHCS has the sole discretion to disallow unreasonable costs and can reduce an award by any amount that is not substantiated, documented, depreciated, is duplicated, or considered unreasonable or ineligible. You may include a bid, proposal, or estimate as additional evidence of damage, as such document may actually have more narrative information than does the invoice or the statement. However, both documents would need to be submitted, both the estimate and the invoice, and OHCS will not just pay based on the bid, proposal, or estimate by itself. If you contracted for specialty cleaning to mitigate drug manufacturing, flood, or fire damage, there must be sufficient evidence submitted to justify the additional expenses charged. Additionally, if the damage is related to a flood, fire, or other disaster for which insurance would cover, please note this program is not a substitute for insurance. There are many reasons why a landlord may not wish to file an insurance claim. However, if such damages exceed $5,000, which is the typical deductible of an insurance policy, even if tenant caused, this program will only pay the amount to defray the cost of the deductible to make the landlord whole, regardless of whether they choose to file an insurance claim or not. OHCS will not cover the expenses for major damages for which insurance could be expected to cover. It is critical that we stress again that you must submit everything you wish OHCS to consider at the time of the application. If OHCS depreciates or disallows an expense, you want to be sure to have enough receipts submitted so that OHCS can make an accurate determination based on all of your expenses. It's important to remember that all decisions are final, and OHCS will not make additional awards even if you felt you didn't receive all that you requested because you failed to submit all of your receipts. Submit everything you wish OHCS to consider at the time of application so that OHCS can make an accurate determination. Next, include photos. Photos help document your request, particularly for large items or significant damage. Before move in and after move out photos, particularly for items that must be depreciated, should be submitted so that OHCS can assess your request. But please do not submit hundreds of photos, just a sufficient amount to document the extent of your request. Typically, 10 to 20 photos is sufficient to tell the story, and certainly not more than 30. Additionally, videos and plug-in devices such as flash, thumb, or jump drives will not be accepted. Video files are typically too large to submit, and any plug-in device may damage or pass viruses on to state property. Do not submit photos after a unit has been gutted. Even the cleanest person in the world will have a subfloor that looks terrible. That's the nature of subfloors. If you need to remove the trash from a unit in order to get a picture of floor damage, that's understandable. But just pictures of rolled up carpet doesn't show the nature of the damage. So be selective in the photos you send. And again, please limit the amount so that we can see the damage, but we're not inundated with hundreds of photos. Finally, the W-9. This is an IRS document and is required in order for our accounting department to write you a check. It's a simple form requiring your name, address, and employer identification number or social security number. You must sign and date this document. The signature, weirdly, is in the middle of the page, so be sure that you are signing and dating it. It is a many-paged document, but you only need to send us the first page that you see on the screen, as the other pages just provide the instructions on completing the form. This document is available from our dashboard as well as in the application itself. However, if you open the link within the application, be sure to right-click and open in a new tab so you don't lose information you've already entered. OHCS cannot offer tax advice. However, any award provided may be subject to IRS rules. Landlords will receive a 1099 miscellaneous MISC form each year for payments covering rent, utilities, fees, storage, and vacancy loss. Reimbursements for property damages are not taxable and will be excluded from the amount reported on the 1099 MISC. If you have questions related to this, again, be sure to consult with your CPA or tax attorney. A check is the only method for payment from the program. We do not wire or direct transfer any funds to you or allow you to pick up the check from our office. The address that you list on your W-9 will be the address that your check is mailed to you via the U.S. Postal Service. You may include additional documents such as late notices, non-compliance notices, or other documents that support your request for funds. Now, we'll walk through the application. And let's go back to our dashboard. And let's click the application from here. And again, it may take a few seconds for it to load. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit bigger so that we can all see it. So as you can see at the top are the instructions. Be sure to read these instructions in full before you begin. I won't read them in this video, but it basically outlines the purpose of the application, the requirements for documentation, and the time frame you have to submit an application, which is typically within 1 year from the date of move out. You'll also see our contact information. I'll show you right here. And you'll also see the limited funds disclosure that I described earlier in this video. That funding is limited and dependent on a state budget allocation. Again, OHCS doesn't chase documentation, but if we request any information from you during the application process, you will have 10 days from the date of the request to respond. If you do not respond within the time frame, OHCS may either make an award determination based on the materials already submitted, or we may deny your application if we're unable to make an award determination. Again, all determinations are final, so be sure to submit everything you want OHCS to consider at the time of the application. The first section is your information. It is about you, the landlord. Every field in the form has the little red asterisk next to it, and it is a required field. And I'm going to just kind of highlight that right there, that little red asterisk. You must enter information into any field with that little red asterisk in order to submit your application. If you have any fields that are required that do not have information in them, nothing will happen when you click the Submit button at the end of the application. The name that you enter here must be the same name as the one listed in the agreement with the Housing Authority or listed on the rehousing certification. The lease and rental agreement and W-9 form must also have the same name. This may be the owner of the property or the owner's designee, such as a property management company. Collection companies cannot apply to this program, and costs to retain a collection company are not reimbursed. We also will not split the payment to different entities, so only the single W-9 will be used to make any payments. We ask that you enter your phone number and that you enter an email address. Email is the fastest way for us to connect with you and will be our preferred method to reach you. Please provide an email address if you have one. If you do not have an email address, you may enter N/A for not applicable, and notifications will be sent to you through the U.S. mail. The next section is all about the tenancy itself. We first asked whether having this guarantee incentivized you to originally rent to this tenant. You can answer either yes, it did, or no, it did not. This question and your response does not impact your award in any way. So please do not feel compelled to answer yes if you did not know about the program prior to applying for funds, or if it didn't influence your decision to originally rent to the tenant in the first place. We then ask if the tenancy was a roommate situation in which the tenant rented a room from the landlord and did not rent the entire unit. You can select either yes or no from the drop-down menu. This type of tenancy is only eligible under a rehousing initiative and doesn't apply to housing choice vouchers. Again, note that awards for roommate situations could be limited to only the rented room and not other communal spaces used by the owner or the tenants. We then ask whether this was a master lease tenancy. Remember, if the tenancy is housing choice voucher, this type of tenancy doesn't apply and you can answer no. This type of tenancy is allowable only under a rehousing initiative, and it's very specific type of lease that gives the leasee, not the owner or the property manager, the right to control and sublease the property during the term of their lease. In most cases, this is like a housing authority or a housing provider that would enter into agreement for a block of units and are then given the authority to enter into subleases with tenants that will actually use them. This occurs typically when a provider is attempting to block them for a particular population, such as those that are literally homeless. Do not select yes unless you meet the definition. This is not typical, so be sure to fully understand this type of lease before you select yes. If you do select yes, you will be required to submit both the master lease and the sublease related to this tenancy. Select yes or no from the drop-down menu. The form has conditional logic built into it. So once you complete information in the last part of a section, the next section of the application will pop up, and you will see that demonstrated as soon as I enter a move-out date. So enter the move-out date. You can either enter the date the tenant moved out or the date you took possession of the property. You can enter the date by selecting the little calendar icon and choosing the date, or you can type the date with a 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and 4-digit year. Once you complete this question, you see the next section pop up. And then the next section is we'll ask information about the property. We first ask whether the tenancy was under a housing choice, a Section 8 agreement, or if the tenant was receiving rental assistance under a rehousing initiative. Once you select that choice, you will get a request for either the name of the housing authority that facilitated your housing assistance payment agreement or the name of the housing provider that facilitated payments of rental assistance to you. I'll demonstrate both of those. There's housing choice. Enter the name of the appropriate organization. If your choice was for a rehousing initiative, we will also ask you to enter information about the name of the contact person at that organization, along with their phone number or email address if you have it. This will help ensure that we're able to match up the rehousing certificate with your application. If no rehousing certification was filed with OHCS by the provider, the tenancy will not qualify for the program. Next, we ask about the rent. We first want the total amount of the current rent that was being charged on the unit, which will include both the portion paid by either the housing authority or the rental assistance provider and the tenant portion of the rent. Then we want you to show us how that's split out. For example, if the total rent was $1,000, you would enter that in the total amount of rent. Then you would split out how much each part of the agreement was paying. So for the housing authority or the rehousing initiative program provider, you can enter, let's go ahead and say they were paying $873 of that rent. Then the tenant's share was $127 of the rent. And then 873 and 127 equals the 1,000. For the property address, just enter the street address for the property that was damaged. This should not include the city, state, or zip, just the street address. But if there's a unit number, please do include the unit number. So let's go ahead and say 123 Main Street, unit number 5. And then you enter the city. So let's say Salem. You don't need to enter the state or the zip code, as the program only will pay for Oregon residences. You can then select the county from the drop-down menu. As part of the property information, we ask that you enter when the flooring was last installed. We ask that you break this down by room with month and year. If the whole unit received new flooring at the same time, you can just enter the single month and year that occurred. Do that, say 05/2020. If the flooring was installed at different years for different rooms, you could enter the room and the month and year. So for example, you could enter, like it shows in this right here, living room was installed in 3/2015. All the bedrooms were an 8 of 2018, the bath in February of 2020, and the kitchen in March of 2020. And that's how that would look. We then ask you to do the same for appliances. For example, the fridge was installed in March of 2015 and the stove was installed in February of 2020. So, and again, if you installed all the appliances in the same month and year, you could just enter the month and year. Once the property information is entered, you will move on to the funds that you are requesting. Again, all funds requested must be supported by documentation. Awards will be reduced for depreciation by OHCS, and we may reduce your award for any amount that is ineligible, unsubstantiated, unallowable, duplicated, or unreasonable at OHCS's sole discretion. So let's talk a little bit about depreciation. This program is designed to reimburse landlords for damages, so there is an expectation that you have actually incurred a cost. This program is not intended to cover normal turnover costs, such as regular cleaning when a tenant moves out, and it does not allow for renovation costs to upgrade your unit. Items replaced must be considered reasonable by OHCS. For example, this program is not an opportunity to replace a vinyl countertop with a granite countertop. If you do choose to make such an upgrade, OHCS will only pay damages related to the original materials. Specific items such as vinyl, carpet, appliances, and painting and other depreciable items will be depreciated by the length of time that the item was in use. OHCS uses a standard life expectancy and producer price index for depreciation purposes. And I'm going to go through an example with you. So let's go back to this. Let's go from here. So let's consider the example of a stove. You purchased a stove for $800 in 2015, and you must replace it in 2020 after the tenant damaged it. The cost will be depreciated by the 5 years that it was in use, even if the current tenant was only in the unit for 2 years. If the original price is unknown, then it is further depreciated for inflation using the producer price index. For this example, the average lifespan for a stove is 13 years, and we know that the original purchase price was $800. So if we divide the 800 by 13 years, or 156 months, the monthly depreciation is $5.12 per month. And since it was at use for 5 years, or 60 months, the depreciation equals $5.12 multiplied by 60 months, which is $307.20. This means that the most OHCS would cover would be the original cost of $800 less the depreciated amount of $307.20 for a total reimbursement allowed by OHCS for $492.80. OHCS does not pay the total cost of a new stove, even if the cost to replace the stove is now $1,000 instead of the original purchase price of $800. The most you would receive would be $492.80. The application specifically requests information on the installation date of flooring and appliances for the purpose of appropriate depreciation. It is assumed that paint was fresh when your tenant moved in, as this is frequently the case. So OHCS will always depreciate painting based on the tenant's move-in date. Additionally, OHCS does not cover the first 2 hours of cleaning, as this is considered normal turnover of a unit. And it won't pay for other normal turnover costs, such as a lock replacement, as this is considered normal wear and tear unless there is evidence that the tenant did physical damage to the lock. If cleaning is not broken down by an hourly cost, OHCS may use the independent sector's most current value of volunteer time for Oregon at the time repairs were completed, or may use a reasonable market rate or industry standard available through reputable sources such as Oregon Employment Department. OHCS will not automatically pay labor costs that do not align with industry standards and is deemed excessive at OHCS's sole discretion. For example, $75 or $150 is considered excessive for regular maintenance activities. Let's return back to the application. So let's enter some amounts. These are all required fields, so even if it doesn't apply, you do have to enter a 0. Enter the total amount that you're requesting. We recommend that you enter the total amount that the tenant owes, even if that exceeds our maximum award of $20,000. It helps to identify what charges were the tenant's responsibility to cover. For this example, let's enter $10,598. Enter the amount of rent that was left unpaid. Again, the total amount of unpaid rent, even though the program does limit unpaid rent to 3 months, which is generally the time it takes to evict someone through the court system. It helps when the amounts are aligned with the application and the ledger and the security deposit accounting. The limitation to 3 months of unpaid rent ensures that funds are available for the purpose of property damage, which is the intent of the program. If unpaid rent doesn't apply, then you could enter 0. For this case, let's go ahead and enter $381, which, if we remember, was 3 months of rent at the tenant's portion of rent. So the housing authority would have paid their rent, but the tenant's $127 did not get paid for 3 months. So $381. If you are requesting a vacancy loss, the amount that you enter here must be for a reasonable amount to make repairs along with a good faith effort to mitigate your vacancy loss. If charged, the cost must be supported by documentation, and payment of vacancy loss is not guaranteed. Standard turnover of a unit is expected at 2 weeks, and 2 weeks will be discounted from the consideration. OHCS will not pay an amount for more than 30-day period and will use invoices and receipts to identify dates for repairs. OHCS will not consider a lease break fee, but will consider a lease break fee as a vacancy loss, again, to cover the period of time in which it takes to make a unit ready for rent, and it is limited to up to 30 days at OHCS's sole discretion. If this doesn't apply, enter a 0. For the purposes of this example, let's go ahead and enter $1,000, which again was the total amount of rent. Fees are allowed, such as late fees. However, all fees must be supported and spelled out in your rental or lease agreement and be evidenced in your tenant ledger. Let's pause and talk a little bit more about fees. Fees must be charged during the tenancy. Fees charged after the termination of the tenancy are not allowable, as a tenant is no longer under a rental agreement and are not in violation of any agreement at that time. If a fee related to a lease violation, such as a non-compliance fee, is something that you wish to have included in the award, you must submit a copy of the violation notice to OHCS with your other supporting documents showing what the fee was for and that it was charged during the tenancy. Fees assessed for inoperable or damaged smoke alarms will not be paid by the program when charged after the termination of the tenancy. However, OHCS can cover the replacement cost of the smoke detector or the replacement of dead or missing batteries as a reimbursable cost for your actual loss. Carpet cleaning fees written into lease agreements will also not be paid by the program. Carpet cleaning reimbursement is allowed, equal to the amount that you paid to have the carpet cleaned. If you replace the carpet, you will not receive costs for carpet cleaning, as we know you did not clean the carpet before you replaced it. The same applies to other cleaning fees. OHCS will only reimburse for actual losses. Resident benefit package fees charged may not be allowable unless there is additional evidence of a landlord's loss submitted, such as the payment of insurance premiums or other costs incurred by the landlord. This program's intent is to reimburse for losses. If your resident benefit package is just options such as concierge service, filter delivery, use of a payment portal, referrals, etc., then it will not be reimbursable. If it includes items such as insurance, we need to see evidence that payment of insurance premiums were made. Filing fees, court costs, or attorney fees associated with an eviction are also not an allowable expense paid by this program. If fees do not apply, you can enter 0. For this example, let's enter 150 as they were late with their rent for 3 months and the late fee is $50 and it was charged during the tenancy, and 50 times 3 is 150. Let's lastly enter the amount for damages. This is where most of your requests will probably end up. So again, you must make sure that sufficient documentation is provided to substantiate your request. Damages may include dump costs to dispose of trash or other items left behind or unpaid utilities. All damages must be supported through the submission of receipts, bills, and statements. For utilities, OHCS must receive the actual statement from the utility vendor showing the amount charged during the period for which you are charging utilities. If there was a bill back addendum to the lease agreement based on a percentage or other factors, you must include copies of the utility bills and the specific calculation factors that you use to determine the amount owed if based on a formula. If the bill back addendum is based on formulas such as square footage or the number of occupants, then the landlord must submit the factors such as the total square footage and the number of occupants on the meter and for the unit, and show evidence of the calculation in the document submitted. OHCS will not accept invoices from third-party utility cost management companies as a vendor invoice. Your award may be reduced by any amount that is not reasonable and/or supported by sufficient documentation. OHCS will not pay any duplicated expenses that may have already been paid in another program. Be sure to submit all your receipts for any damages that you're claiming. We will not pay based on estimates, bids, proposals, or just handwritten notes of a cost. Your total for each of these specific categories of cost may exceed the amount that you're requesting, which is acceptable. For example, a tenant may have damaged a unit and left unpaid rent in the amount of $22,000, and your individual line item can equal 22, but the amount that can be paid by OHCS can only be 20,000. So for this example, we're just going to enter the remaining amount of our request, which is $9,067 for damages. And again, you will see that the next section popped up. And this section is talking about your supporting documentation. It's important to know that the application will only accept 10 separate attachments, so you may need to combine documents into a single PDF file or into several files in order to stay below the 10 attachment limit. If you're unable to use the attachment function or you have more than 10 documents to submit, you can email or mail your documentation to us. The email and mailing address are included in the application and on the dashboard. Remember, please do not email hundreds of photos to us. The processing of emailed photos takes an inordinate amount of time, so please limit your photos as previously described. Once again, you're provided with a list of all the documents that you must submit for your application to be considered complete. You must submit everything you wish OHCS to consider at the time of the application. All decisions are final. Once an award determination is made, we will not consider the amount awarded to you with the submission of new documents, and OHCS will not chase documentation. However, if we do request documents from you, please do respond within the 10-day limit. The time to process your application will begin when OHCS has a complete application, including all your documents, and that can take up to 45 days for us to process the application, although it does typically take less time than that. You must certify that you're either attaching documents or otherwise sending them to us by clicking each of the boxes to certify their submission. So let's go ahead and do that. And if you note, these are not required fields because you may not have all those documents at the time you submit, and you may be submitting them through email or some other way. So click on the things that you do plan on submitting, even though they're all required, and you can see they are required documents. If you had a small claims judgment, you can click this and submit the money award or the small claims judgment to help support your application. However, it is not a requirement. You will then use the attachment function, which is right here, file upload. You will then use this attachment function and attach your documents. You can either drag and drop your documents into this space here, or you can click the browse hyperlink and select your files from the appropriate location on your computer. If there is anything that you would like to share about your application that you think OHCS should know, please feel free to use this space to enter any information. This is not a required field, and leaving it blank is fine. But this is also a very good place to add that you will be mailing or emailing additional documentation. Be sure to fully read the legal certification, as you are subject to all rules, guidelines, information, terms, and conditions of this program when you submit your application. This means that you agree to submit supporting documentation and that all such items submitted are true and correct, and you are subject to terms identified in the Oregon False Claims Act. You agree to an understanding that all decisions are final and that your application may be denied or award reduced if OHCS deems any expense ineligible, unreasonable, unallowable, duplicated, or unsubstantiated at OHCS's sole discretion. You agree to indemnify, defend, save, and hold harmless Oregon Housing and Community Services, its officers, employees, and agents from and against all claims, suits, actions, losses, damages, liabilities, costs, and expenses of any nature whatsoever, and to defend all claims, proceedings, lawsuits, and judgments resulting from or arising out of relating to the Oregon Housing and Community Services operation under this application for funds. Be sure to read all the terms and conditions prior to submitting your application. These terms and conditions will be sent to you again through your confirmation notice once we receive an application. Remember that you are agreeing to these terms and conditions when you apply for funds. Your application is then electronically signed by typing your name into the signature line, in which you again affirm that you understand that you are subject to all the instructions, terms, and conditions, legal certification, and electronic signature stated in this application. Go ahead and put a name here. Once you hit the submit button on your application, you will receive an automatic confirmation that pops up on your device's screen. You will also receive an email from the program's email address, landlord.guarantee@hcs.oregon.gov, typically within 24 hours. This email will provide you a copy of all your responses and show evidence that you did in fact submit your application. You may need to check your spam or trash folder if it does not show up in your inbox. Once again, assuming all documentation is attached, OHCS reviews the application. And then let's briefly talk about how OHCS does come up with your award amount. And I'm going to flip back. I'm going to go ahead and go back. There we go. So let's take a quick look at how OHCS will calculate your award. Assuming that all documentation submitted aligns, we will use the security deposit accounting for the base charges, as these are what the landlord believes that is the tenant's responsibility to cover. First, we identify all the charges. In this case, you can see that the landlord had invoices that totaled $5,556. The landlord appears to reduce the amount of cleaning and painting, which could be for depreciation purposes, or possibly the landlord just didn't feel that the total invoice was related to damages, but were maybe for other touch-ups or maintenance that would not be attributable to the tenant. OHCS then uses the same invoiced amount and then reviews each invoice for allowability. So in the case of cleaning, we depreciated the first 2 hours as normal wear and tear at a rate of $45 an hour, which, as you can see, actually awards more for cleaning than what the landlord had actually calculated. While awarding more than what is requested is not common, it does happen depending on OHCS's review of the damages. The painting, refrigerator, and carpet were all depreciated by OHCS based on the factors we have previously discussed, which reduced the allowable costs that OHCS could pay. So even though the landlord charged the full invoice to the tenant, OHCS will not pay for the depreciation, which reduced the award amount. And since eviction fees are unallowable within this program, you can see that they're not included in the total award amount. The landlord applies the security deposit to the charges, as does OHCS. This ensures that there's no duplication of benefit and that all payments applied to the charges are factored into the amount left owing. It's important to understand that this does not duplicate the deduction of the security deposit. We are not deducting this deposit twice. OHCS is simply applying the security deposit to the charges in the same manner that the landlord does. However, since we do not have any insight into what costs that were actually covered in the security deposit, and such use may have been for unallowable costs within our program, OHCS will identify the security deposit as going to allowable costs within our program. Again, this doesn't take the security deposit out twice. It's just applying it to all the allowable costs of the program. So you can see the landlord identified a balance owing of $4,356, but due to depreciation and an unallowable cost of eviction fees, OHCS was only able to provide an award of $3,627.33. This means that the tenant will still have a balance of $728.67, which OHCS could not cover. Landlords are free to pursue collection efforts for the remaining amount. However, collection efforts must not include the amount that OHCS has already paid. Once your application is processed, you will receive an email notification of the approval and the amount of your award, or you will receive an email of a denial and the reason why the application was denied. An award notice will include a table that is similar to what is being shown here, identifying the allowable costs that OHCS included in the award amount. We will also include a narrative of any mitigating factors that impacted your award amount for further clarity. OHCS will always default to email, so again, be sure that you double check your spam or trash email folders. If approved, it may take up to 20 days for our fiscal staff to process the request and send a check. Again, the check is mailed through regular U.S. mail and there are no options for other payment methods. We will only send a physical check to the address identified on your W-9 form. So that's it. That's the process for applying to the Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee Program. If you have further questions, you may contact us at the contact information that was provided on the dashboard and within the application. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.